Do you remember the Stephen King novel called The Stand? And there was, Cyrus, you know this book. We were talking about it earlier, The Stand. Captain Trips.
Never heard of it.
Yes, you have.
Yeah,
You're a
yeah.
fan. I know
It
you are.
it's hard not to think about what happens in that book. When we're looking at the coronavirus.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's called Captain Trips colloquially in the Stephen King novel. And it wipes out virtually everybody. Now, we're not, hey, everybody, don't run away. We're not saying this is Captain Trips. It's just interesting that Stephen King chose this motif for that book about a plague that just devastates humanity, and only a few people are left alive.
Yeah, wasn't there another one too? You were mentioning.
As a matter of fact, that's right. Dean Koontz, he wrote a book called The Eyes of Darkness. This is kind of weird. This is up there, in my view, Cyrus, with those strange foreshadowings of things like 9/11 and other things in The Simpsons, where 25, 30 years ago, I think they were on that long ago, you would see in The Simpsons, you would see like two twin towers and a plane crashing into it, and the numbers 9/11. I mean, how on earth could that possibly happen? These weird coincidences. But to your question, he wrote a book called The Eyes of Darkness back in 1981. It's a novel, and in this book, there's a passage that refers to a killer virus known as Wuhan 400. And Wuhan is the name of the city, or Wuhan, I don't know how they say it. It's a city in China where they believe this virus got out of a lab. And just a little bit of reportage here today from an article that discusses this. The passage in the book makes a reference to a killer virus known as Wuhan 400, the name of the city where the coronavirus originated in real life. The extract from the novel has since gone viral on the internet, and many social media users express disbelief at the subject matter of the work. The excerpt features a character discussing biological warfare, calling the virus the perfect weapon. And this is a quote from the book, a Chinese scientist defected to the United States carrying a diskette record of China's most important and dangerous new biological weapons in a decade. They call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of the city of Wuhan. Wuhan 400 is the perfect weapon, he says. So that's weird, if you ask me. I mean, how back in 1981, 39 years ago, how did that get in there? I don't know. It's a coincidence. I don't know what to make of it. Back to the phones. And before we do that, I just want to tell you why I'm asking you this question. Have you changed your travel plans? You're saying, all right, he's been hyping this. What is the reason? Here's the reason. I want you to think about the danger of the novel coronavirus, or any other illness for that matter, that you can catch. Maybe it's tuberculosis. Maybe it's the flu. Whatever. But let's talk about for a minute, because the coronavirus is in the news right now. Chances are you will take appropriate countermeasures to avoid, if possible, getting sick, right? I mean, if this ramps up, you and I and probably most people are going to try to have some masks. You're probably going to avoid crowded public places. You're probably going to avoid situations where people are hacking and coughing and sneezing. And if you yourself are not feeling well, chances are you're going to stay in. So almost certainly, you, like I, will begin modifying, if you haven't done so already, your behavior because you don't want to catch this virus. That's a no-brainer, right? Okay. Question. Are you doing the same thing in your spiritual life? What? Are you doing the same thing in your spiritual life? Are you modifying your behavior to avoid sin? Are you not watching certain movies that you would otherwise like to watch because absent the fast forward button on the remote control, which, is a helpful tool when you can power past something that you shouldn't see. But let's say you're not using that and you're just watching the movie and you're letting all that junk go into your mind, where it stays, by the way, on your mental hard drive forever. Those images reside there forever. What about the music you listen to? What about the company you keep? What about the things that you look at on the internet? What about, gossip, slander, detraction? That happens pretty frequently on social media. You don't have to look far to find that. And we could go on down the list. there are many ways in which we can fall into sins, many of them serious sins, if we're not careful. So my question is simply this. We all understand how important it is to preserve our bodily health, if at all possible, by avoiding those places and things, and yes, people who could spread that to us. You take countermeasures. You do things to make it less likely that you're going to get sick. And the question is, are you doing the same kind of thing in your spiritual life? That's the reason I'm asking this question. Because, as I said a minute ago, I and you and everybody listening, we're all making modifications, maybe little ones right now, maybe imperceptible things that other people don't really notice. And if it should happen in God's providence that this virus gets insane and a lot of people die, and I hope that doesn't happen, please God, but if it did, you're going to be making big modifications in your life. Your kids are not going to be going to school. You're going to be canceling your vacations, your business trips. You may be ordering your food from Amazon or whatever the app is that you use and avoiding going to grocery stores because you don't want to get sick. My point is, how wonderful it would be if all God's people adopted the same kind of mentality when it came to, I want to remain virtuous. I don't want to catch the contagion of sin. I don't want to go in places or look at things or be involved with situations that I know I'm likely to get spiritually sick from, and therefore I'm going to make modifications in my daily life, like praying more, going to confession more frequently. When was the last time you went to confession? Receiving Jesus worthily in the Blessed Sacrament. What does that mean, worthily? Well, none of us is truly worthy, right? I know I'm not. Just ask my wife, she'll tell you. But worthily in this context means that you're seeking to love, know, and serve Jesus. And that means that you, if you're aware of serious sins, you go to confession. That you are aware of what you're doing. You're thinking about what you're doing when you receive Holy Communion. You don't go up distractedly chewing gum or looking at other people or wondering what you're going to have for lunch that day. You're really focusing on what you're doing and praying and thanking the Lord, all those things. And you know all these things. I'm just telling you stuff that you already know. If you're doing that, if your life is marked by careful, methodical ways of avoiding sin, man, you are on the fast lane to heaven right now. Because you're doing what Jesus said. Jesus said, the wise man is the one who hears these words of mine and does them. He's like a man who builds his house on a rock. And you know the rest of it. The winds and the rain and the storms burst against that, and the house does not fall because it's built solidly on this rock. Jesus compares that or contrasts that to, he says, the foolish man is the one who hears these words of mine and doesn't do them. He's like the guy who builds his house on sand. And when the wind and the rains and the storms burst against that house, Jesus says, it collapses. He says, great is the fall of it because there's no foundation. So that's it in a nutshell. That was my reason. That's my God door. And I'd love to walk through that God door with you. Think about that. And maybe as you're making these modifications in your own daily life, how you shop, where you go, are you shaking hands at the sign of peace at Mass, et cetera, et cetera. Just have in the back of your mind, ask yourself this question, am I also acting accordingly with my spiritual life? Because let's face it, your body's going to die eventually anyway. We're all going to take that dirt nap at some point, and the body will go to the ground, and eventually it will be reunited with us, but your soul is going to live on forever. So as important as your bodily health is, and it is important, it's more important that you practice good spiritual hygiene so that you are spiritually healthy and filled with God's grace. And yes, for your children as well. You moms, you dads, you're really careful about what you let your kids eat. You don't want your kids eating junk food. You don't want your kids eating food that might be contaminated. You don't want if somebody sneezed all over the hamburger and French fries, you don't want your kids to eat that. You'd send it back. I'm not going to eat that. Because you know you don't want to put something in your body that will be harmful to you. And you're careful and you're attentive and vigilant. You don't want your kids to be eating stuff that's bad for them. All the more so spiritually. I think if nothing else, for me personally, and I hope this is true for you, this coronavirus outbreak and everything that's going with it and all the concern that's building and building, and we'll see where it goes, this is a great reminder that it is even more important to be spiritually right with God. And if you're spiritually right with God, everything else follows from there, no matter what may happen. But if you're only focused on masks and gloves and hand sanitizer and not touching doorknobs and not shaking people's hands, and you're neglecting the spiritual side of things, you're missing out. And I know that's not true for you, but it might be true for people you know, so you can give them some encouragement.
For more of The Patrick Madrid Show, visit relevantradio.com/Patrick.